welcome back to the Transmissions Draft League. Today we have got yet another video. This time we are team building for our Week 6 game versus the Cretaceous Draco Meteors and my good friend Dale. This is going to be a very important game for us as it is one of 2 weeks that are left. And they are 2 pretty tough ones. Of course, Dale has a really good team and is currently, I believe, 2 so far, with a couple of tough losses that were very tight. And of course, our last week is up against 616, who's currently undefeated 5-0 right now. So definitely got to make sure that we can hold on to our position. Currently, we do hold the number 2 seed at 3-2, but of course, there are 2 teams that are only a game behind us, and assuming that JKG wins his Week 5 game, which I think is a safe assumption, I do think that there is a potential for 3 teams to be very close behind us if we don't keep pace here. So let's make sure that we give ourselves the best chance, and we're going to do that by team building, hopefully the winning team for Week 6. So, just as a recap, as I like to do for these team building videos, is kind of walk you through what resources I have available to me, and then I will walk you through my thought process for the team building process. So, of course, your Manchester Bewears consist of Indeedee Female, Iron Crown, Talonflame, Hariyama, Ogrepon Cornerstone, Grafii, Squawkabilly, Reuniclus, Alchemy, and Rampardos. And our opponent's team is Raging Bolt, Ogrepon Wellspring, Chenpao, Corviknight, Entei, and then the last Pokemon I will mention, but I'm actually not even going to spend time prepping for them. Realistically speaking, they are not in my consideration. They are decent Pokemon, but they won't have any impact in this match. But those are Passimian, Rhydon, Arbok, Regice, and Barraskewda. The only one to even note there is Barraskewda, and that one should be taken care of with the aforementioned resources that we have going into this. Of course, I also have a damage calculator up. I don't lean on this too heavily unless I am wanting to calc for very specific things when I am setting up a Pokemon. So I'm not going to start at the calculator. We're first going to start with just general vibes of what we think is going to be good. And for that, I believe that, as per usual, Hariyama is going to be one of the best Pokemon in this week. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that this Pokemon hits really hard. So this Pokemon, of course, with Guts and Flame Orb, gets to ignore something like the Sacred Fire from Entei, and with the right combination of coverage moves, Hariyama also hits just about everything on Dale's team really, really hard, especially when we slap on a really nice Terra type for Dale's team, which in my opinion is Terra Ground. So naturally speaking, Hariyama already walls Chenpao pretty well. It's not perfect, as Chenpao's ice type attacks still do hurt it pretty badly, but even with that, Hariyama is very bulky and therefore can kind of shrug off some of those hits. And now the biggest thing is that unless it's being hit super effectively, it doesn't really care. So as a fighting type, our opponent really can't hit Hariyama for super effective damage, aside from with Corviknight's Brave Bird. But with it becoming a ground type, there are a lot more things that can hit Hariyama super effective. So the biggest thing for this Terra Ground on Hariyama is going to be dodging things like the Thunderclap from Raging Bolt, and just overall giving us a little bit extra damage on one of our coverage moves. That being said, if I am worried about something like a priority attack, then you can probably guess that I am not expecting to lean too heavily into Psychic Terrain for this match. Of course, I do think that is worth bringing, as showing our opponent that we're willing to use it if they decided to disrespect it in the team builder. does kind of mean that we can build the rest of our team with the idea of there not being psychic terrain, and then just having that as an additional mode. So for this, the moveset is definitely going to consist of Fake Out, Close Combat, and Headlong Rush. Close Combat is our strongest fighting type attack, hits everything that would normally resist or is immune to the Headlong Rush. And the Headlong Rush hits both Regible and Entei, and after a Terra also KOs both of those Pokemon's bulkiest sets. Of course, we will know before the game if our opponent is going with those bulky sets. The biggest way to see is just where the Assault Vest lies for our opponent. I imagine it's going to be on the Entei, and in which case it will be the most important for us to force Terra on Entei early so that we can either deal a bunch of damage with Headlong Rush if that Pokemon decides to not Terra and it's used on something like Chenpao to avoid a Fake Out, or with our next Pokemon to be able to burn that Entei. The last move is up for debate. I like Protect as it does give us a lot of flexibility. It allows us to kind of position our team a little bit better, and gives us some other options if we want to play defensively. The other thing is that we don't really need any coverage move here. The only thing that we could really consider here is something like Wide Guard. Our opponent doesn't really have powerful spread attacks, so that's not really something we should consider here. We could also consider something like a Bullet Punch. It doesn't hit our opponent's team very well at all, but it is good for closing out some of those KOs, which I don't think that Hariyama will be necessary to use for that. So instead, I think we are just going to stick to Protect. Now, one thing I am going to do is I'm going to put Protect in the first slot here. Now, this is something that you can do with your own sets. It is technically optimal in order to do this when you're playing in a time setting. What ends up happening is if you run out of time, Pokemon automatically selects the move that's in the first move slot for your Pokemon. So putting Protect in that slot gives you like the safest move if it's automatically selected. Obviously in the draft setting, we're not going to be playing under timer, so this doesn't really apply, but it is important to be able to have that here. Now also, this Hariyama is meant to deal as much damage as possible, so we're going to absolutely max out our attack. Now, the only other thing for us to super consider here is the speed stat that we want to be at. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and bring up Ogerpon here. Now, Ogerpon at its absolute fastest is 178. So if we go ahead and pull up our calculator here, 178 divided by 2, because we are going to be using Tailwind, means that Hariyama needs a speed stat of 90 in order to outspeed this Ogerpon under Tailwind, meaning that we do have to invest quite a bit into our speed, but it does leave us quite a few stats to be able to put into our defense stat. And of course, another point of optimization here when you're making your own sets, if you take away just one stat point from your dump stat, you can actually end up getting two stats in two separate stats, as at level 50 it only requires 4 EVs to get your first stat point and then 8 for each subsequent one. So by instead of investing 100 points into our defense, we invest 92. We're able to get an extra point of special defense and HP out of that. Now, with that being said, I did mention this Pokemon. We haven't seen this Pokemon for a little bit, but we are going to bring Talonflame here. Talonflame is actually pretty decent into the matchup. One, because it does hit the Ogerpon pretty hard. We are able to OHKO this Pokemon if we decide to bring an offensive Talonflame, which is definitely something we should consider. But for my money, the best thing that Talonflame is going to be able to do here is spam Will-O-Wisp. Our opponent only has one Pokemon that's immune to that, and that's Entei, and as we already saw with Hariyama, his Headlong Rush does have the ability to KO Entei even if it's super bulky. So we can potentially force that Pokemon to Terra, and if it loses its fire typing, now that Pokemon can also be burned. Even with Chien-Pao, a lot of these Pokemon lose basically all of their teeth if they are no longer healthy, if they become burned. In fact, if Ogerpon becomes burned, it actually loses the ability to KO Talonflame, even if it has no bulk. So, like I said, we are definitely going to be using this Pokemon for both Tailwind and for Will-O-Wisp. The other thing to consider here is what our attacking move will be here. Of course, Brave Bird is going to be our strongest move here, but we can also consider something like Dual Wing Beat in order to maintain our Gale Wings priority. We could also consider something like Taunt. I don't think that that's as important, as I don't think our opponent actually has too many good uses for setup moves here. Looking at the rest of our support moves, Feather Dance is not terrible, as we're not a Prankster Pokemon, so even if Entei decides to not Terra, we can still lower that Pokemon's attack without needing to burn it. Truth be told, burning is way more effective at actually lowering a Pokemon's attack because it does cut the actual power of physical moves rather than lowering the attack, and that is permanent even if the Pokemon switches out. I actually don't mind the use of Quick Guard here. Quick Guard is also really nice because our opponent does have quite a few of these priority attacks, namely being Extreme Speed, Thunderclap, and Sucker Punch, of course. So I am actually going to add Quick Guard here, and of course our last move does have to be an attacking move, so let's go ahead and add on Brave Bird here. Now, our item can change depending on the set that we are going for. I think I'm actually going to prefer a set that is a little bit more bulky. It looks like, if we're looking at something like Entei, this Pokemon really cannot hurt us whatsoever. So being able to set these two Pokemon in front of Entei is really, really nice, as that Pokemon has been Dale's best Pokemon so far. And I do want to be able to kind of bully around some of his best Pokemon. The only other thing is that we will need a little bit of speed investment on our Talonflame in order to make sure that we do outspeed the Ogerpon, as I do think that that's still an important benchmark for us to hit. So we are going to hit 179 on our Talonflame. And then I want to very much bulk out this Talonflame. This is another part of the EV min-maxing here. So one thing that I did here with our HP stat is I made it a multiple of 16. 176 is a multiple of 16. And although it doesn't have impact here, basically the reason why we would be 116 or 176, sorry, is in order to get maximum healing from something like grassy terrain or leftovers. Obviously we can still be leftovers. I think we're probably going to prefer Citrus Berry on this set. But for scenarios of healing, what you want to do is be at the correct threshold or multiple of that healing. So for leftovers in grassy terrain, it's a multiple of 16. For Citrus Berry, you want an even number or a multiple of 2. And for the pinch berries, you want to be a multiple of 3. All of those are important for healing. When it comes to something like Life Orb, you actually want to be at a multiple of 9, which is just under a multiple of 10, because Pokemon always rounds down when it comes to these after turn healing and damage effects. This is also true for something like Sandstorm, by the way. So if you are running your own Sand team and you have Tyranitar, I'm sure you know this from last season, we would run multiples of 15 instead of multiples of 16 in order to dodge taking maximum sand damage. Although in most cases, if that's a Life Orb Pokemon, it's better to be a multiple of 9. Okay, as I was saying with our item, here I am thinking about running the Citrus Berry. It's also pretty okay for us to run something like the Rocky Helmet here. Rocky Helmet wouldn't be too shabby, giving us a way to punish something like Chen Pao for trying to attack us. And that being said, Chen Pao also doesn't deal a ton of damage to this Talonflame set. It is capable of 2-hit KOing us, but it does require Icicle Crash in order to do so, as Ice Spinner is not quite strong enough to guarantee do that. And with Citrus Berry, neither of those attacks can, which does mean that we are feeling pretty good about having Citrus Berry there, and it does leave our Terra open. Now, remember, we are expecting on using our Terra on Hariyama, so we don't want this to be like a Terra that is absolutely necessary for Talonflame to have. And in that case, I think I want to go with Terra Flying here. It kind of just shows that we have the ability to go on the offensive. So if Ogre Pawn is the less bulky set, the faster support set with not any bulk whatsoever, we can go Terra Flying, and this Brave Bird is capable of taking out Ogre Pawn if it does not have enough bulk. Next up, of course, we could start building out our Psychic Terrain. Even though we're not going to use it, obviously we do want to show our opponent that they have to respect it. Basically force them to bring things like Assault Vest Entei with Snarl, as that allows our secondary type of offense with Hariyama to get up and running a lot more quickly. I think the other interesting thing to run here would obviously be Trick Room, as despite us running a lot of speed on Hariyama, it is still slower than our entire opponent's team, aside from something like Corviknight. And I believe Raging Bolt is also a lot faster. Correct. Raging Bolt is also a lot faster. So if we wanted to, we could definitely run an offensive version of Trick Room with Nicholas and Ndidi to really punish our opponent for trying to stay outspeeding us, especially since we're showing them Talonflame. The other thing that I think would be really interesting here is Alchemy. I think being able to show our opponent that because you can't get through Hariyama fast enough, we can potentially give it a Decorate boost. Decorate is obviously better on a Pokemon with a spread attack, because then you're doubling the damage output against 2 Pokemon rather than against just 1. And unfortunately, as bulky as Hariyama is, it's not immortal in this matchup. If it was a matchup kind of like our week 1 versus JKG, where Hariyama did feel immortal, I would feel a lot better about sending a Decorate that way. So instead, I think what I want to work on building out here is our secondary offense / extra support with Ogre Pawn Cornerstone. So Cornerstone's pretty solid in the matchup, obviously because Rock hits a lot of our opponent's team, at least for neutral damage. So if we look at something like a less bulky Raging Bolt versus Ogre Pawn Cornerstone, the Ivy Cudgel is a 2-hit KO, and of course Draco Meteor is also a 2-hit KO, but they do have the Thunderclap in order to win that exchange. So just being able to get use out of Ogre Pawn in other ways is also really nice. The other thing we do have to be careful of is actually the Sacred Fire burns. I think they're going to be less impactful here than they otherwise could be, just because our team is faster than Entei, generally speaking, especially with our speed control. So we are able to threaten that Pokemon before it really gets to do what it wants. And on top of that, this is yet another Pokemon that threatens Entei immediately and forces it to Terra, allowing us to force that Pokemon into being burned with our Talonflame. So I think what I'm going to go ahead and go with here is I'm going to go ahead and give it Spiky Shield, Follow Me, Ivy Cudgel, and I definitely want to run a Grass move for our opponent's Ogre Pawn. Um, of course, our opponent's Wood Hammer does hit us really hard. If they do become a Grass type, our Power Whip is capable of just knocking them out, even if we are Jolly. Horn Leech would require Adamant in order to get that KO, and it's even not guaranteed. But we do have a lot of Pokemon that are faster, and I think we can add on a little bit of priority as well. So I think I'm okay with running Horn Leech here. I don't think also we're going to get into scenarios where it is a 1v1 Cornerstone versus Wellspring, and if it is, Cornerstone only really wins that 1v1 if Wellspring spends the Terra. Either way though, I do want to be as fast as possible here, and we're just going to be running pretty standard Ogerpon set here, hitting as hard as we can in order to force a Pokemon like Entei to Terra, but also making sure that we can 2-hit KO Raging Bolt, as well as this Horn Leech being able to threaten a Terra Water Ogerpon Wellspring. Really standard set there. The other thing is that Follow Me gives Hariyama even more space, as we saw in our last match. Follow Me can make a lot of space for another attacker if that attacker is really the problematic threat for our opponent, and that was really the case for Hariyama. So when I think that that is the case yet again, I'm inclined to lean into it for sure. Okay, like I said, I would like to start building out our Psychic Terrain mode here. So let's go ahead and add Iron Crown. Of course, Iron Crown can be a lot of different things in this matchup, and the most interesting to me is Booster Speed. Basically what this allows us to do is it allows us to outspeed Pokemon like Chien-Pao and Ogerpon that would otherwise really threaten us for big damage. This also gives us a little bit more versus Entei, though like I said, if that Pokemon is the Assault Vest set like I think it's going to be, us being Booster Speed rather than Booster Special does mean that we do a little bit less damage to that Pokemon. And so we definitely need another way to do that, which we have 3 other Pokemon and that do threaten very generously. Now, of course, we do want to run Protect and Tachyon Cutter here. Tachyon Cutter, obviously, for the Chien-Pao, which in this scenario, Tachyon Cutter does KO a non-Terra, and we need a little bit of help in order to KO a Terra Chien-Pao. But of course, like I said, with our speed control options here, I do think that that is probably fine. I'm also inclined to not even bring Expanding Force here. Now, it would give away that I'm not really planning on bringing in Didi. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad matchup for Ndidi, but I also don't. I think that we might need more offense in order to keep the match close. So the other thing that we could definitely do here is bring Specs Iron Crown, and what this does is, as long as we have Tailwind up, Specs Iron Crown can actually break through our opponent's team pretty quickly. We are the Choice Specs variant. We can KO a Terra Chien-Pao as long as it does not resist the Tachyon Cutter as well. And then we can just slap on really good coverage moves. Volt Switch is not terrible into anything aside from the Raging Bolt. And then of course, if we are Terra Ground, that Terra Ground Terra Blast is going to hurt that Raging Bolt if we become a ground type. The other thing is that, truthfully speaking, Iron Crown actually matches up pretty well into Raging Bolt defensively. We aren't threatened to be 2-hit KO'd by anything unless we Terra into that ground type. And then our Terra Blast does guarantee 2-hit KO, and our opponent needs a couple of Draco Meteors to KO us back. And then for coverage moves, it would be Expanding Force, Tachyon Cutter, Terra Blast. And the final move being maybe Air Slash if the Wellspring is inclined to take all of these hits very well. It does look like it actually, so let's see what Air Slash looks like. It is a 2-hit KO from Choice Specs, and the only thing that comes close is Expanding Force in Psychic Terrain. There is also an argument for Calm Mind here as well, as we do have, like I said, a pretty decent defensive matchup versus a lot of Dale's team here. I think we do need either immediately offensive Iron Crown or a really speedy Iron Crown that's able to just poke small holes in our opponent's team. I think since we already have big wall breakers, I'm inclined to go with the speedier option that can kind of clean up. So let's go with that. Protect, Tachyon Cutter, and Expanding Force. Since we are the speedier version, we can also look into some supportive moves here. Fortunately, Iron Crown doesn't really get too many of those. So instead, I think we're probably just going to be resigned to a standard set with Terra Ground. Now, bulk-wise, we do want to be able to live some important hits. And of course, we also do need to keep our special attack 1 point below. So that is our maximum special attack investment. And then, let's see. 76, we are a multiple of 16, but of course we want to do our little here to get maximum bulk out of this. And I think this set is fine. We're not doing quite enough damage that we want to be doing, but what this does do is it at least scares our opponent into thinking that we can lead NDD and Iron Crown. That's definitely an option for us. If our opponent decides to leave Entei Chien-Pao behind, because it matches up so poorly into our first 3, we can start leading Iron Crown and Ndidi and starting to poke holes. The other thing is that Chien-Pao actually doesn't match up that well into Ndidi Iron Crown. Type-wise, it's not bad, but with booster speed Iron Crown, we can actually outspeed that Pokemon and force it to Terra. And then, yeah, let's go ahead and bring back up Ndidi. Ndidi, of course, is going to be our way of getting up Psychic Terrain and threatening that. I think that our best defensive type here is probably going to be Terra Fire. It's not great into something like the Wellspring. Wellspring, honestly, is probably the hardest matchup for these two, aside from Assault Vest Entei. But if we do get into a scenario where we decide to lean into these two Pokemon, Terra Fire and Ndidi actually does end up walling out Entei pretty well, as it is fairly bulky. And then with a Terra Fire, let's see. This is Entei. Stomping Tantrum is not a guarantee. It actually cannot 2-hit KO Ndidi, and firing back our own Psychic does only 25%, but of course we're leaning on Iron Crown to do the majority of the damage there, although I imagine Entei is going to be spamming Snarl in front of these two, so we're basically just relying on KOing the Chien-Pao next to it, and hopefully allowing our back Pokemon to deal with the Entei. The other thing is that Terra Fire on Ndidi does give it some utility for opposite mode, where, like I said, if we are struggling against Entei, we are able to help out against that Pokemon. We're definitely going to give this thing Rocky Helmet. There's not too many scenarios where this is actually going to activate, except against things like Stomping Tantrum or the Wood Hammer from Ogerpon Wellspring or Corviknight's attacks. So not really going to come into play too often, but it is definitely necessary for us to have. Then of course we also do want this thing to be as bulky as possible, physically speaking as well. I'm actually not going to invest into our special defense, as naturally speaking, if our opponent does not go with the more offensive Raging Bolt, Indeedee already kind of walls this Pokemon. Excuse me. Now, as for movesets, this Pokemon definitely needs Follow Me. I'm also inclined to run Helping Hand here. Now, we could run Trick Room. I don't think that that would be the end of the world, and it would allow us to have our last Pokemon be Reuniclus. Like I said, Reuniclus matches up pretty poorly into Assault Vest Entei, but it might be able to break Assault Vest Entei a little bit easier than Iron Crown did, especially if we are Terra Psychic with the Life Orb in Psychic Terrain, 252 Quiet, Expanding Force. We actually do require the Helping Hand in order for this to have a chance to KO. That's not bad. I don't hate that. And then instead we could be Dazzling Gleam so that we don't get walled by the Chenpao. Yeah, I think I don't. That's if we are going to bring Reuniclus. The other argument here would be something like Squawkabilly, who was an unsung hero last week. Squawkabilly was really awesome at intimidating the big threats on our opponent's team. The unfortunate news is it won't be able to do that for the Entei. I'm expecting it to be a more defensive Entei set, so that's not that big of a deal. It also doesn't work against the Corviknight, but we can see Corviknight actually doesn't get KO'd by our Final Gambit, so that's probably not worth going for. And the Thunderclap does make Final Gambit harder to land. I think probably Reuniclus is our best option as our final Pokemon here. So let's go ahead and just add Trick Room here. And I think the final move slot is definitely also going to be Dazzling Gleam here. It does decent damage to the Chenpao, who otherwise really does wall our Psychic Pokemon here, as we are going to be bringing 3 of them. So if we bring Indeedee here with Dazzling Gleam, it doesn't quite 2-hit KO the Chenpao, but does get pretty close. And then on top of that, of course, with Terrifier, we do wall this thing out pretty well, aside from something like Icicle Crash being able to 2-hit KO us, but that is for another day. Also, remember, because our opponent can run Ice Spinner, that is something that we have to watch out for, as Ice Spinner can remove terrains. So Iron Crown is a lot safer of a lead next to Indeedee, as it does threaten to KO the Chenpao immediately before it can take out the terrain. But as I said, his most likely lead is probably Chenpao next to Assault Vest Entei, in which case these Psychic Pokemon do not really have anything they can do against that. Now I am going to bring pretty standard Reuniclus with Protect, Trick Room, expanding force, and a coverage move. Here I'm looking for hopefully a ground type move if we can find one. Fortunately, we don't have one, so let's just find out what our strongest special attack is going to be. Coverage. Flash cannon might be our only choice, as it is the only thing I think that is going to be able to hit Chen Pao. As I don't want to rely on Focus Blast. The truth is, none of these are going to help versus Entei. Yeah, so our best bet is probably going to be Flash Cannon to help out with the Chen Pao. Of course, we do run to run. An absolute minimum speed set here so that we can be faster in Trick Room. I'm also going to run a fair amount of physical bulk so that we can survive a little bit longer against those Pokemon aforementioned. So this is probably going to be the team that we run with. I don't really foresee making too many changes here. All of these Pokemon are pretty decent in the matchup. Of course, our Psychic Trio here might struggle a little bit, but they do have things that they can do. Of course, Indeedee makes a lot more space for Hariyama. Iron Crown can be the cleanup for the big three here, and then if our opponent decides to leave something behind, such as that Assault Vest Entei with Snarl, then these two get a lot stronger in the matchup. But yeah, that is going to be the team that we bring for week number 6. Hopefully you are excited and hopefully you cheer us on, and I will see you in that game. Bye-bye.